Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to basically do a little bit of a rant and kind of give my take on something that I just find interesting that I never have understood. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this because it's this whole notion that seems to exist. It's like this underlying notion in all these evidence-based practitioners of training and everything on the internet that strength is something that's bad. They almost act as if strength is not a benefit, as if that's not one of the reasons everyone should be training and lifting weights to some extent. And this goes back to everyone from people like Menno Hamsel or whatever his name is, Ian McCarthy, Sebastian Sunny, guys I used to slam years ago, all the way up to people that I actually respect like Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. People will look at data and evidence and they have this underlying assumption when they start talking about hypertrophy training that strength itself doesn't matter, and that if all other factors were even remotely equal, that it wouldn't be advantageous to get stronger, even in the long term, even if the goal was hypertrophy. But one of the things that I don't understand either is this whole concept that hypertrophy only is something anyone would ever reasonably train for other than a tiny little subset of people. And I guess that's because I come from more of a sports background, that to me the whole point of gaining muscle is performance. There's a reason athletes bulk up, right? There's a reason a football player wants to put on 15 pounds of muscle. There's a reason a boxer, an Olympic lifter, a power lifter, an MMA fighter might want to gain muscle to go into another weight class. Why? It makes them stronger and more powerful. Because more muscle equals more power and more strength. In other words, if you put on 10 pounds of solid muscle mass, even in some cases if that means you gain 5 pounds of fat with it, you're stronger. You can hit somebody harder on a playing field. You can punch harder. You can kick harder. You can grapple more effectively. In other words, strength is a tremendous attribute in sports. And there's a reason we separate athletes by weight class, particularly any sport in which there's contact involved. So reason records in every strength sport exist in a weight class, because size and strength go together. Meaning the more muscle you have on your frame, the more likely you are to be stronger and more powerful. You're going to have a tendency in that direction. It gives you more potential. And that's kind of the whole point. And I've never understood this idea of someone saying, I want to be big, but not be able to perform. And it's almost as if there's this notion within this community that if they could gain a bunch of muscle and lose strength, that they would be totally happy with that. And I don't understand that concept, because it's not being able to perform. The goal of getting bigger and not being able to perform better, it is, in my mind, like Jim Wendler put it, like having a big dick that won't get hard. It's completely useless. Or it's like having a gun, like getting a really big gun and not having any ammo for it. It's all show. It's all show, and if you're ever tested on it, people are going to realize that you're fake, and that's actually what it is. It is fake. It's like, by that same token, a lot of us, we enjoy a nice set of fake breasts, right? But this whole idea of training for size without also wanting strength, at least even as a short-term modality, which I'll get into in a second, would be like if we had a pill available that would grow breasts safely, relatively safely compared to a surgery, and it would cause more mammary glands to grow there, so they would be real breast tissue that perform and had the ability to produce more milk and everything else, that someone would still choose the surgery over growing real breast tissue and just get fake boobs put in, right? That's about the equivalent. It's in a way ludicrous because it's promoting fakeness. And that's the thing. When I look at a lot of the data that these people produce, I look at that and I wonder how they draw the conclusions they do. It's like they will take different modalities that produce the same muscle mass and declare one is just as good as the other when one of them produces more strength. Or because there's other negatives they don't want, they'll say that the one that produced more strength with the same muscle is inferior. Again, ludicrousness. And it's not that the data is bad, it's that their conclusions are ludicrous, because they need to remember tons of athletes out there go through hypertrophy phases to help them get stronger because they want more muscle. And perfect examples of stuff like when you look at Dr. Brad's data showing 7 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 10 produce the same muscle mass because the load was equal, meaning because you're lifting a heavier weight with those 21 reps. He found in studies they gained the same muscle mass, the two groups. But the group that lifted the heavier weight gained more strength. Yet his conclusions were because it took longer, more time in the gym, and that some of them struggled with recovery because, again, maybe it wasn't programmed perfectly, that somehow the other one was superior, even though they gained the same muscle but were weaker. And I just don't grasp that of how that could ever be seen that way. And particularly when you think of the way that most people train, the only reason we would be looking at a time frame in the gym is for people who have a really, really, really tight time economy. Meaning people who can only get in the gym for 30 minutes 3 times a week, figuring out how to put on as much muscle as they could in theory in their 30 minutes. I mean, there's some logic to that. But almost no one who takes the time to read scientific studies like this or cares about this stuff is training in that manner. Even people who train personal clients. I watch personal trainers who train clients. They haven't been there for an hour. They're purchasing hour-long sessions. If you've got an entire hour to work with, there's no reason you can't do heavy work with big barbell movements. And that's kind of the other point. If time economy was an issue, the best thing you could possibly do would be to cut out all the isolation work and just stick to barbell movements and weighted body weight exercises. If time economy was that important to a person, that's what they would do. They would get the most bang for their buck. So I see a study like that, and they conclude one thing, and I look at the same data subset, look at all that same data, and say, the 3-rep group is better. In fact, I look at a study like that, and I ask the question, is there any point to doing high reps at all? These high reps, the 10-rep sets, produce the same muscle with less strength. Well, that's not any good. What's the point of that? Because the other thing to consider, what about the long term? We know that volume is one of the primary drivers of hypertrophy. Training volume, workload. If you take 2 guys who have the same muscle mass and one of them can now squat 400 at the end of the program and the other one squats 350, which one can produce more workload per set? Well, obviously the guy who can squat 400, because the other guy who squats 350, he can only do 350 one time. The guy who squats 400 can probably do 5-rep sets with the 350. Who can produce more workload? Who can produce more tonnage in a workout? Who can, in a 30-minute workout, can produce the most volume? The stronger one. Who can induce more hypertrophy now in the long term? The guy who's stronger. So if we're going to look at it from that perspective, the stronger person in the long term even has the hypertrophy advantage because they are capable of generating more tonnage. Because here's the thing, people get this idea, oh, there's 10 rep strength and there's 1 rep. No, there's not. The guy who has a 50-pound heavier 1 rep max than you, his 10 rep max is probably higher than yours also. It's not how it works. Okay, his 10 rep max is higher than your 10 rep max. It might not be 50 pounds difference, it might only be 20 pounds different. But he's stronger than you. And a person who does nothing but train 1 to 3 reps, even if you train mostly 10s, again, if he's comparable in terms of muscle mass to you, and his max is considerably higher, when he goes to grab 10 rep sets, even though he never trains them, he's going to be stronger. He's going to have more workload per set. So I see that and think that. And the same thing, I go look at a study that shows, or multiple studies now, to where they compare strength and muscle gains of isolation versus compound movements, right? What do they conclude? Some of these studies look at this and they find that a leg extension and a squat produce the same amount of quad growth and volume as equal in a study. The guys gain the same amount of muscle. But the group that did the squats, their strength goes up more, and not just on the squat, their strength goes up on the leg extension. In other words, squats add more strength to your leg extension than doing leg extensions does to your leg extension with the same muscle gain. I see a study like that and I step back and ask, why is anyone doing isolation work at all? Why are strength athletes messing with isolation work? Why are we doing tricep press downs for our bench press? If studies are coming out showing that you gain more strength even when you isolate a muscle to test its strength from doing compounds for the same amount of muscle gain that you do from an isolation movement, isolation movements aren't even a good choice at that point for assistance work. I start to question their value at all. Because again, we've got multiple studies now, when they go head to head, show lat pull downs produce just as much bicep growth as a curl does. But they also make you stronger. See, we're getting back into these questions of why do evidence-based people look at all this stuff? Why do they bother to do high reps? Why do they bother to isolate anything? Why don't they just focus on the barbell movements? And you almost have to wonder that. And the reason seems to be that they're actually genuinely afraid of getting strong. They have this notion in their head that the ability to lift a really, really heavy weight with good form through full range of motion is inherently dangerous. But it's not. It's not any more dangerous. In other words, if you build your max squat to 500, it's not significantly more dangerous than building your max squat to 400. And a 400 is not that impressive of a max squat for a healthy male who's been training several years. It's not. In all honesty, if people trained correctly, that would be average. That would be average for guys with 3 or 4 years in the gym. That wouldn't be considered exceptional. Not inherently more dangerous, but here's the thing. If your goal is to reduce injury risk in the long term, who gets hurt less? The stronger person. When someone gets hit by a car, who's less likely to tear tendons, break bones, things like that? The strongest person. People who are stronger get hurt less easily in car wrecks, falls, being attacked with weapons, gunshots, knives, bludgeoning objects. Their bones are harder to break. In general, they are tougher. They're less likely to get hurt on a playing field. In other words, being as strong as you can be, even though you might argue it might increase your chance of gym risk by an extra 1/100th of a 1%, if that, maybe in theory, but if you're using weights that you can handle with good form at all times and you're not ego lifting, a 500-pound squat is not inherently dangerous. It really isn't. It's not bad for your knees. It's probably not ever going to hurt you. It's very, very unlikely. But what's going to happen to you in the long term? You're less likely to be hurt doing anything else physical that's injury prone. So in all honesty, training for strength reduces the chances of injuries. And that becomes tremendously multiplied when we start talking about people who have any sort of dangerous job or people who are involved in a contact sport. Because you also got the factor of you're just harder to knock down if you're stronger. Back if you're going toe-to-toe against someone else who also trains, being stronger becomes a real big advantage when you start hitting each other. So again, we've got to wonder why they have this notion, and it seems almost as if that's what it comes down to. They're genuinely afraid of getting strong. These people are genuinely afraid of getting under a heavy barbell, and they seem to be genuinely afraid of getting people that they coach or work with or that they train strong either. And it's a really bizarre position, particularly when you look at all the evidence that's out there. And I look at a lot of the same evidence that these evidence-based people look at, and I see the advantages to the strength. I don't see the disadvantages. Sometimes you have to train a little longer. Sometimes you have to pay a little closer attention to your recovery. Well, if you're taking the time to read studies, then you probably have the attention to detail necessary to do that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.